Today is a fascinating things hidden. I'm joined by Professor Michael Rectenwald, who is someone I've talked to a lot over the last few years to learn about various things as it relates to the woke ideology, its roots, how to combat it. And I wanted the main theme of this discussion today to kind of build upon something that Dr. Rectenwald and James Lindsay and I did a few years ago. We touched on it. It was so fascinating because I never heard anybody else talk about this in a mainstream kind of conversation, which is like, what do we replace the woke ideology set of theories with intellectually? So I want to explore that, but to do so, we'll just prep with a little bit of introduction. So how you doing, sir?
Great. How are you doing, Davis?
I'm doing great. And I've enjoyed your work at the Mises Institute and all over the internet. And of course, you've got a new book coming out soon. Can you tell us the title of that, what we can look for?
Yeah, it's called The Great Reset, a Libertarian Perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a perspective we haven't heard a lot, that angle, right? Because fortunately, libertarians have gotten a lot of bad press in the anti-COVID world because so many of them kind of went along with the establishment narrative, unfortunately, right?
Especially the Cato Institute and large segments of the Libertarian Party as such.
Right.
But that's going to change with the Mises caucus taking over the party at the end of the month.
Right. That's the end of this month, you're saying?
Yes.
Was that
That's when the convention is, and the Mises caucus will firmly control the party after this.
Good. So at least they'll actually be authentically libertarian for once.
Yeah, that's right, for sure.
Would it be like a 50-51-49 split or a total knockout?
I think it's going to be a bloodbath, frankly.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be a sad day for a lot of the hedonism that's been going on in the party.
Yeah, that's right.
So, Dr. Rectenwald, tell us a little bit about your book, okay? The Great Reset. Now, also, yesterday, as of the day that we're recording this, so that would be Wednesday of this week. That'll be the 18th, right? You went to Congress.
Yes.
And
this was my second meeting down there. I spoke with.
Was this televised or non-televised?
No, non-televised. It was with the Congressional Caucus, the Conservative Opportunity Society. And then yesterday I spoke to, so that was back in March. And yesterday I spoke to the spouses, Republican spouses of Congress. So I spoke to actually the spouses of congresspersons who may be more influential than the congresspersons themselves.
I didn't even think about that. That's a good idea. I didn't know there was a caucus for that. That's cool.
Yeah.
And so how many spouses were there or whatever?
I would say about 40.
Okay.
And they listened with rapt attention to what I had to say about the Great Reset. And they were a little bit stunned by some of the things I had to say. Particularly, I gave some back history of the Great Reset, I think going all the way back to the 1930s. We could go back further, really. But I went back to talking about the infiltration of socialists and communists in the United States from the 30s on. So this so-called great long march through the institutions that we often bemoan, where socialists took over the academy and everything else, really wasn't a grassroots movement at all. It was a movement by elites, by elitists in very high up positions in banks and corporations and tax exempt foundations. So they've been at this for years, decades, if not a century.
Wow. So how you started at the 1930s is when the Great Reset project?
Well, it could go back further if you look at different globalist plans, but I didn't go into those because I didn't have time really. I just talked about the kind of socialist subversion that we've been undergoing for 100 years in the United States as a precursor to this Great Reset, so that it doesn't look like it's coming out of nowhere. Some of the people that talk about it act like we're coming from this position of purity,
Right.
Like we had pure free market economy and we had pure liberty and we had all these wonderful things, which is not true. We haven't had that. So I try to make that clear. And
you know, one of the things that kills the whole free market thing as something that we've had is the existence of intellectual property. I mean, that's a total fiction.
that's for sure. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
a fiction. Like all these little Pfizers and these little Bill Gates and people, they'd have no power if it wasn't for patents. This is a totally fictitious
absolutely
government
monopolies,
power.
which are monopolies in effect. They're limited monopolies over various products, and it's a way of controlling the economy. If it weren't for those monopolies, we wouldn't have had this COVID crisis that we did.
And you know what? I tell you what, I'm just thinking out loud here. If you wanted to run a single issue campaign to blow up the entire establishment, you run on getting rid of intellectual property, just abolish it. Just start with medicine, right?
Absolutely.
Because you'll piss off the artists if you go after the copyrights for their stuff too.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll take care of Disney later. You start with their freaking medicine. You say, okay, what?
Right.
You lefties, you love medicine for all. Okay, we're with you now. We're going to give it to you really for all. No medicine's allowed to be patented, period. You got to use your other resources to figure out how to sell and make your profit. And they're going to say, oh my God, how are we going to make money off of it? Well, people still make money selling generic supplements. And
right. Well, the irony is that leftists love monopolies.
Right.
After all, what is socialism but a monopoly?
Right, right.
So they love monopolies. And the irony, of course, what we've gone through, and we've seen this with the COVID crisis, and the embrace of big tech and big pharma by the left, is that the left is actually supporting the major corporations, and no matter what they do. And so it's a vast irony that we have almost a reversal, supposedly, of positions, whereas the left is now pro corporate, pro big tech, pro big pharma, pro government, pro military, pro everything that they were supposedly antithetical to all this time. It's the biggest reversal of all time, really.
Well, I think it's kind of like trying to figure out what they believe is kind of like you meet someone who's been in a psyop for many years and some kind of brainwashing. I mean, seriously, if you go down to somebody who's a Gitmo guy, right, who's been tortured and waterboarded 2,000 times with loud music and Mary Poppins blaring in their ears of the CIA 24/7, you go and ask them, what the hell do you believe? They say, I believe the sun is made out of orange juice. You'd be like, what the hell? I mean, that's what we're dealing with, the left.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lost their ever-loving mind. We got to feel bad for them. I mean, seriously.
They are a psyop in themselves. They are actually a psyop underway. They are the psyop.
How?
Well, they're programmed like this. So they're out there gaslighting people 24/7 by virtue of the fact that they have been programmed by the corporate state, for lack of a better term right now. And likewise, they are actually an operation in themselves. They're the legions of this big conglomerate of the establishment.
Yeah, that word legion's important. It reminds me of you get me talking about the Bible again, about the legion, the demoniac, right? He says his name is Legion, this idea of being possessed by the many.
That's right. That's right. The Satan is a legion.
Right.
And that's the interesting thing.
That's the garrison of the empire that they use to, terrorize and keep the village in its kind of togetherness. When you talk about how do I want, because someone like you're like a Swiss Army knife intellectually. I could go so many different ways. So when you look at the founding of America, it is kind of a revolutionary liberal project.
Right.
So one could say that we had it coming. If you found an entity with a revolutionary overthrow spirit, and yes, there was checks to that. But I mean, you do have Jefferson excited about the French Revolution, which was, I think, demonic.
Yeah.
So he's not such a saint in some sense. Is this something like revolutions always eat their own? And so we were founded as a revolutionary experiment. There were some good things in it. Maybe it was better than some other things, but eventually revolutions eat their own. And so now our revolutionary founding is finally going to get the full overthrow of its product.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you might say that the country was ironically founded under Lenin's idea of a permanent revolution,
Right.
that it would never end, and that there was no stopping
That was
it.
Jefferson's idea. He said it should be overthrown. What, every generation? What was it? 80 years or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. The tree of liberty should be watered by the blood of tyrants. It sounds like Biden's administration's view.
Yeah.
That's Jefferson, really.
Yeah, that's true.
They didn't like his certain views of liberty and property and farming, but I mean, if Jefferson had just sold plant burgers instead of whatever the hell he was growing, tobacco and cotton, or they're keeping. But the point here is that we were started in a revolutionary spirit, and revolutionary spirits are going to beget more and more schismatic revolutionary spirits.
Yeah, it's kind of like Protestantism, if you will.
Yeah.
That, once you start to protest, then there's a protest against the protest, and endless splintering. You have these endless schisms. Kind of reminds me of the Monty Python movie, where they are sitting around talking about the various sects of Christianity early on.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, how the hell are you supposed to stop that if it never had a ground, how does it get stopped in the first place? A lot of what American Christians think about getting back to the good old days was just a temporary little reprieve. That was still revolutionary, but they just felt kind of relatively normal to where they're at now.
Yeah.
So there's no footing there. There's no grounding. You're just, they can't see it that way because they don't see the full scope of where we can.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm trying to get across about this Great Reset too, is that, let's not pretend that we had some sort of idyllic, pure system of liberty and free market enterprise and individual rights and all that. We're not. That's not the case at all. And there's been subversion. Like you said, there's constant revolution, but there's been constant subversion of the U.S. for whatever you think about the project. There's been subversion of the project for almost from the outset.
Right. I mean, George Washington was warning about. He was an oligarch. First of all,
yeah,
so he's not but he's an oligarch, but he doesn't want to be a king. Some people say that's a good thing. We typically say that's a good thing. Some people might say maybe that was his mistake.
Yeah, that may be the mistake.
He warns in his farewell address about, don't be going off and getting involved with every entangling alliance. Here we are in Ukraine, in Somalia, everywhere. So we didn't listen to him. But the fact that he had to say it back then was a sign that people already wanted to do the things we're doing to Ukraine already. So we've always had that kind of messianic complex to go and be a part of every revolution in God's earth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to bring them about in many cases, in fact, I mean, there's plenty of evidence, and I think this is becoming well known, that we funded the Russian, the Bolshevik Revolution. We also, our policies were aimed to basically inaugurate the Chinese Communist Revolution. These were not this idea that there was this polar opposition between the West and, between capitalism and socialism is just a total myth.
Right.
This is just absolutely false. And then, of course, we've been doing this all over the world.
So what are things like the Vietnam War? Was that another faction of the power?
Yeah, this was a total, we were arming the Soviet Union to arm the Vietnamese that we fought. So we actually armed the Soviet Union during the Vietnam War. This is very well documented. Of course, this got Anthony C. Sutton, who was a Hoover Institute fellow, it got him thrown out of the Hoover Institute for bringing this up. His investigations went too far for comfort for the establishment. They didn't want to hear it.
Yeah, even to this day, he's kind of a blacklisted figure, not allowed to talk about it in terms
of which I refuse to abide by that.
Right.
I cite him a lot.
Right. And so he's saying that we were intentionally funding both sides of the Vietnam conflict?
Yes, we were funding both sides.
Was the side that wanted to go to war against Vietnam, was that faction aware that our government?
No, not really. There was some inklings of that. But, that all got squelched in the 50s. There was some very serious congressional. the notion, the fact that we had an enormous contingent of communist sympathizers, and not just sympathizers, but activists in the state, in all the tax exempt foundations, in the university system, in the banks, in the whole establishment. So that this idea that there was this polar opposition is just a fabrication. It's a post hoc construction. The Cold War idea. So the Cold War was being funded by the West on both sides of it. You know, they were supplying technology, they were supplying manufacturing, they were supplying everything to the Soviet Union, who was arming the Vietnamese, and then we're fighting against the Vietnamese at the same time. It's incredible.
Right. So when you look at that, where do you think so you think that actually the people who wanted to go to Vietnam, even though that war was a corrupt endeavor that wasn't going to work, but they were actually trying to root out communism, that they didn't know that their own government had put it there?
I don't know. You know, I mean, it got lost in the shuffle. I think that we were trying to root out communism. But yeah, that was the official ideology, right? But yeah, nothing could be further from the truth, really.
So is the real agenda driving these actions, and what you see now with the Great Reset continuing these actions in world history, is the main agenda to do true communism, or is communism just a marketing ploy for oligarchic fascism? What is the
well, I think it's more than marketing. And you know, some would say, oh, they'll, you know, the elite or they will use whatever ideology that works at the time. But I think that's not true. They actually want a global socialist state. They actually do want a globalist socialist state
because they think it'll be better for everybody.
For them, especially. And maybe some of them are true believers in their ideas, like Schwab, who says, you know, it'll be fairness and equity and sustainability and all that. I don't know whether they believe their own rhetoric and ideology or not, but that is that it would be better for everyone. Now, Carroll Quigley thought that, you know, in his book, Tragedy and Hope. He was actually an insider to this elite. And he believed that, in fact, this elite was doing good, that they were doing what they thought was the best thing for humanity, to control all the world's resources, and likewise all the people in the world for their own good.
Right.
So the object is global administered corporate state socialism, with an oligarchy on top and basically actually existing socialism for the rest.
So is the socialism part, is that an ideological thing they think will help people, or is that just their best way of keeping competition at bay?
Well, I mean, there's two sides to this, right? You have to say there's an ideological element, of course, and this helps sell it to the public, to the population at large, the majority, but it's hard to say whether they actually believe their own rhetoric, or, you know how people lie to themselves, right? Yeah. I mean, this is a very typical thing. People lie to themselves so they can maybe rationalize what they're doing, knowing full well that it will lead to the kind of oligopoly that they have in mind.
See, the reason why I want to know some of this, like, it seems like the Democrat Party has kind of abandoned a lot of its economic economic policies that traditionally were trying to redistribute wealth. They don't talk about that as much. They talk about trusting Pfizer and stuff, which obscene profits. So, like, I don't see, if they're really hell bent on selling that to people, why did they switch to stuff about race and cutting your dick off?
Yeah, that's the new means.
Get rid of money, you know?
Well, that's good, because we were going to talk about wokeness, and here's what I think the function of wokeness is.
Yeah.
You know, it isn't really aimed at the people that it's pretending to, whose grievances it's pretending to redress. It's really aimed at the vast majority who is to feel, basically who's to reconceive their rights and their property and everything in terms of privilege. Well, privileges can be revoked as opposed to rights, technically.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of wokeness is about shaming the vast majority into abdicating their rights, abdicating their so-called privileges, and therefore to level the population in a way across the globe.
By self-immolation, basically.
Basically, guilt trip them into
Shutting
abdication.
their mouth. And,
Yes.
yeah.
I mean, and this is the grand irony where you see all these,
that is a psyop. That's what you do when you want to conquer another country.
Yeah, that's a psyop. It's a huge psyop.
Into a state of despair. That's the idea.
That's right. It's totally demoralization. It's a demoralization campaign meant to basically destroy the self interest even, and the belief in the self of this vast majority, to make them feel so unsure of themselves that they're willing to basically abdicate all responsibility, but also all of their so-called privileges, everything that they've gained through whatever means they have, and to basically turn it back and say, look, this whole idea of wokeness is really basically an attack on people's property. It's attack on their rights. It's a way of getting their rights and property away from them, because it is a massive redistribution campaign. But it's not. It doesn't benefit it doesn't benefit the minorities that they supposedly are aiming to benefit, because they just become disabled as well, and then they become nothing but wards of the state. It's about trying to turn everybody into a ward of the state.
But they handpick a few minorities who are very good advocates of the religion.
That's right.
And replace the dissident people, replace their jobs.
Right.
And then they keep shaming the cycle, and then the rest of the minorities get poorer and poorer.
Get poorer and poorer. Like you see the promotion of to press secretary of Jean-Pierre, and it makes it look like on the face of it they're really diversifying everything, and likewise giving these opportunities, but it's pure tokenism, really, and it has nothing.
Yeah. They put a black face up as soon as they go and invade Somalia, the bastards,
Yeah, that's right.
Sick people.
Very sick. I mean, this is twisted.
Why can't Republicans talk like this, by the way? They always try to act like a tough guy. Oh, I don't care about, they don't understand how to frame the argument. You have to take their little bullshit away from them.
Yes, that's right.
And the MAGA people don't know how to do this still. I still listen to them like, dude, you don't get it.
No,
one of the problems. Somalia, but the Republicans always say we can't afford to get involved in Ukraine. We can't afford to get in Somalia. That's a good way to say it, I guess. But you can also say they put a black face at the same time they invaded an African nation. I would say that every day to black people.
Yeah,
but they're so stupid they don't know how to talk. I'm sorry, it just pisses me off every time I think about it.
Yeah, that's because the Republican establishment is not really anti-statist. They're just anti parts of the state they don't like.
Yeah.
But the other parts of the state, they're growing avidly.
Yeah.
The military elements, they gladly contribute to that. So it's just a total contradiction.
And I love how it's now trendy with the new right or whatever to call it the regime. And that's more edgy than saying the state, like,
yeah, that's
state,
right.
But regime, this is an enemy occupying entity or something. What's so stupid,
Yeah.
But so the woke ideology is a psyop to create demoralization. Now, where is it coming from? Everybody said China, London, America. Where is it coming from?
China is actually China. It's not coming from China.
China's a patsy in this. They're like Oswald.
They're a foil. They're a foil to make the West look good by comparison. But I mean, it can go all the way back to the foundation.
Like, if you don't behave, we're going to give you China.
Yeah, right. At least we're not China. At least we're not in China. Look what they're doing over there, the Uyghurs and all that, right? So this makes the West look good by comparison, but really, no, it isn't coming from China. If anything, it's being fed to China from these elites in the West.
Right. In America or London or Western Europe?
London and the United States. That's right.
Yep.
Yep.
So, if that's what its aim is, that's what its goal is, then how do you intellectually defeat it?
That's a great question.
That's where we left off. And you had some different things you had told me about, and in the roundtable with James Lindsay, and I don't remember exactly all the different ones, but maybe you could just build off of that. How do we intellectually defeat it?
Well, if you want to talk about it from a philosophical standpoint, first of all, we could say that, look, this whole woke ideology and all of the elements of it, like transgenderism and the whole 9 yards of all this identity nonsense, this is all postmodernism, really, theoretically speaking. So we need to overcome postmodern theory, overcome postmodernism. And that means a return to realism, really. It means a return to realism, scientific and really common sense, frankly. To this be real, it really boils down to something pretty simple. That is to say, we know that there's 2 sexes. We know that there's not 72 genders. We know that you can't change your sex. It's not, scientifically, it's not possible unless you get into genetic engineering, which they hope to do, by the way. So, I mean, genetic engineering such that you have a designer babies, I don't know how a fetus would signal that it's really in the wrong gender at the time, but I mean, don't be surprised if they start to suggest that this is true. That, well, this fetus told me that it wants to be a girl, not a boy.
These dumb nutcases are going to figure out how to make those pig chimera human babies just so they can have a little pig human entity.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is all.
I mean, it sounds crazy, but give it 10 years, folks, and watch these assholes.
Yeah, I'm telling you,
human hybrids that are sick and dying. It's like, this is his entity. This is his essence. This is his.
If you buy into the idea that you sound crazy and conspiratorial by saying these things, then they just, incrementally introduce them without resistance. That's the problem here.
That's why I saw that they're now saying they teach these kids. It was in some kind of Philadelphia teachers conference. You probably saw it. So where they're teaching them to talk about front hole and back hole instead of vagina and anus. I mean, these people are so repulsive. And how do you beat them? Because the way it's like a double bind, because they play on the natural conservative instinct to have disgust. So if you pull back with disgust, they kind of feed parasitically off of that disgust instinct to say, hey, you're a little too mean, right?
Yeah.
So your instinct to say, oh, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
They always use a little bit of that overreach to say, well, see, you're a bully. And now we're going to use that victim energy that you've created for us to fill up that vacuum with more moderates going towards our position of dehumanizing the human body.
Well, they're taking the political ideology of egalitarianism and they're using that to feed. They're using that to feed on the hosts, And then they say, well, if you are disgusted by this means you're phobic of these people, right, which means you're discriminating against them, which is against our principles. So they just keep metastasizing that notion out to everything, so that before you know it, we're going to have to be like accepting, like you said, chimeras, part pig, part human. And that's just the way it goes. And it will be according, rights to robots before long. That's what it is. It's a kind of a virus, really, that feeds on our principles or our putative principles in order to extend its reign over everything. So that's one way to get across to these people what they're doing. Another thing I think is important to show them what dupes they are, really, that they're actually serving the interests of these elites.
Who?
The believers in this in this woke stuff. Yeah, they're dupes. They're serving their masters faithfully because these people want to destroy the family. They want to destroy all the social ontologies that hold the society together so that they can reign supreme over it all.
So how do you convince a liberal that they're a dupe, though? I mean, they want to be duped.
Well, frankly, I think you have to be traumatized, and I'm not saying we should traumatize them purposefully.
They're already
but
traumatized.
They traumatize each other, and that's one good thing.
But they're already traumatized. Like COVID
They are.
Is a giant mass trauma.
They need the trauma to come from their own ranks. That's the problem. So when you get, like I did, when I got traumatized by the left, I got shaken out of the hole. I got shaken out of the matrix. I was able to see it for what it was.
That's why it's so counterintuitive. But I really believe it's like the less the right can do, the better at this point. It's so painful because you look at what, the typical Republican response, look at what Biden's done. You see, we should have had Trump in there. It's like, dude, you don't understand. Let them endure the pain now.
Yes.
It gives you a quicker return to glory.
Solution, yeah.
In the long term, because
yes, I almost said that I'm almost saying that in my book. Maybe we should let this great reset happen.
Yeah.
Because then if it happens, we'll see just how pernicious all this is. And then we'll be able to tell what's good from what's not, and otherwise it's completely unclear. So they've muddied the water so much that it's hard to distinguish. So if we let things play out to their full extent, then we'll know exactly what the outcome is, what the effects of these things are, and we'll be able to identify the causes.
Yeah. So again, going back to how do we intellectually defeat them? Because I don't believe that putting Trump in there or whoever really is going to do much. It's not going to do anything. There's nominal benefit. That'd be nice in the momentary. It's like a momentary high. It's not going to give you anything long-term health-wise.
No.
What do we do intellectually to defeat it in the meanwhile? That's
what I think we need to point out basically what the agenda is behind it. And the intellectual fallacies that it's founded on, postmodern theory and this idea that everything is constructed and everything is a social construct. So we really need to go back to a principled understanding of human existence. And, I think for me, the only way is really through a divine source and understanding that we are creations, that we are not God, and we are not creators of ourselves as such. That I think is fundamental. But how do you get that across to atheists and actually Satanists and things like that? It's hard to do.
That's a good point. So a lot of the weak spot of this leftist coalition has been their reliance on conservative, cultural, Christian rooted people like Hispanics and Blacks.
Yeah.
And I've always, in my whole project at A Neighbor's Choice, has always had that as a long-term mission, which is to unite the culture back to Christ and to politically apply what's happening. I believe, let me ask you this. What do you think would happen if the 50 million or whatever Christian conservatives who are politically active actually digested and understood the implications of mimetic theory? I mean, do you think?
Oh, that would be very, that's asking a lot.
I know that's a hard reach, but I'm just saying, let's get half of that. If we got 10 million Christian active political people actually understanding some of the implications of
what aspects of it, what particular prong of it would you mean?
Because I think I've said this to you guys a lot. I think mimetic theory ninja kicks the hell out of the postmodern project completely, because it scratches the itch of the left's need for victim concern.
Yeah.
And it allows the conservatives to stop dialectically running away from the left's pointing out victims. It kind of heals that whole dialectical tension, because it says there are real victims.
Yes.
Stop talking about just bootlicking the police all the time. Okay. That doesn't make you Christian. That makes you a typical Roman soldier. Stop doing that.
Yeah.
And understand that there are victims of society.
Yeah.
And I think mimetic theory, properly understand, brings that back into the conservative heart in a way that gives them empathy for things that are not traditionally conservative.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it also gives them a playbook to allow them to see the way in which their desire to be a good boy, to be a good citizen, which makes they have an aspirational desire to fit in with the establishment. How many
Yeah.
conservative authors, for example, always put on their how many #1 New York Times bestseller? Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity. Oh, they hate the New York Times, but they want to let you know that the New York Times approves them. It means they're operating under a kind of hegemonic dominance. They're
Yeah, that's true.
totally
Absolutely.
submitted people. Totally.
This is true. And I would go even further, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say people like Jordan Peterson are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They're kind of controlled opposition, in my opinion.
They may not know they are, but
they don't know they
yeah.
are. I'm not saying they're literally like on the take.
Exactly.
But they're so concerned about the establishment's approval that they're unwilling to make the kind of leaps that I think we're making here. Right. And because this is now we're getting into dangerous territory where you're talking about actually challenging the establishment itself. Right. And as such, and not just, the manifestations that are being performed by the underlings under them, these people that are dancing like marionettes, to their every finger move. Right. That's effectively what's going on. But if you challenge what the elites are up to in the first place, then you got a whole different story. Right. I've been trying to get these people that I'm in an email list with of dissident professors to see this, but I haven't had any success.
To see what specifically? The satanic?
Well, they keep talking about, wokeness in the academy and how do we stop it? And I said, the only way to stop it is to first understand what the agenda is here. It isn't just a bunch of blue-haired kids on college campuses acting out and the administration going along with it. We're talking about an orchestrated campaign. And you're right. It's to create victims in order to create victims in order to basically destroy the so-called non-victims and to victimize everybody, in effect. I think that's really what it comes down to. But I think you're right. Christianity poses the real solution.
Well, Jesus said when he says, when I am lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. So here's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Jesus, I'm just thinking of this analogy, so it's not going to be perfect. Jesus is like a magnet, and he's drawing humanity in history, right? And so we're being drawn to him slowly, and different cultures are coming at different paces and different regressions, and it's not a perfect march, but there's this magnet kind of pulling the iron filings. And this leftist project is like a perverted corpse that imitates the Christ, and it's kind of like in the way, right? Mm-hmm. And it's almost as if humans are so pathetic that we're more attracted to the corpse version than the real pure good thing behind it. So we're drawn to that corpse version of Messiah. Really, the real Messiah, the corpse is kind of co-opting parasitically in the place of the magnet, but it's still being drawn by the magnet. The magnet is still in charge,
Yeah.
God, Christ is still. So when we say orchestration, I feel like this is a dumb corpse that has to move with where the magnet's pulling it. And so they're really not in charge, because I think that I don't know, maybe I'm trying to be triumphalist here, but it just seems like their project is rapidly understood as pathetic by more and more people. And it's
definitely pathetic. And it's going to fail. It's going to crumble. This corpse will definitely collapse under its own weight, and in the fact that it has no animating force in it. I think you're right. There's no animating nature to it. It is it's dead. It's a dead effigy of something. It's an effigy. It tries to attract victimhood and to create victimhood in order to supplant the ultimate sacrifice. So I think you're right about all that. How do you get all this across to these people? I mean, we're talking about something that's
it's a story,
Yeah, it's a revolutionary. What we're talking about, and I think this is true, that Christianity is the most radical idea there is. If you really understand it, it's a totally radical idea.
Well, let me give you an example. That there's a new movie, Doctor Strange or something. I saw it. I had never seen this. I never saw the first one, but someone asked me to see this Doctor Strange 2. And the whole movie this Marvel character. And the reason why I like watching these movies sometimes is because they are an example. Disney is like the modern myth making, priestly cast making movies for the pop culture, low info masses. So they're giving myths to try to, you go into a cave in a theater with the crowd and you're doing this kind of ritual where we watch these things that appeal to our unconscious desires and kind of give us a sense of who we are as we go back to our job. So you do this. And I like watching these things because I'm always looking. I'm like a Girardian guy looking in there. I'm like, okay, tell me if you can resist the Christ message, and you can't, because in this movie, it's demonic and it's witchcraft and it's all this wicked stuff, but they can't get outside of the sandbox of Christ, because ultimately the movie, I don't care about spoiling it. It's not that good of a movie, but the villain is a witch. She's a witch woman who, she has some sympathy for. You have to have sympathy for her, but ultimately she's considered the villain. And the reason why she's a villain is she's willing to kill anybody who's in her way of trying to preserve her children from death.
Yeah.
So she'll go. She wants to preserve her children, and she'll kill. She literally does kill as many people as she can, just to let them have this magical ability to keep her children alive. And so that reveals the leftist project in a nutshell, this kind of possessive ownership, we own you and we will kill everybody if you don't take our vaccine, and if you don't eat our green goopy sludge, we'll kill you. Like, we're just witchcraft, demonic shit. The Christians are these male patriarchal figures who will do everything. Now they put a little LGBTQ Hispanic girl who crosses borders interdimensionally, because that's what Hispanics, I guess, are supposed to do now. And their little parade that they're known for is that they just cross borders. That's so pathetic, but that's how the establishment treats them now. You're the cross borders people, and that's what you do in our little project. But they put this little figure in there to put a little rainbow thing. So what I'm trying to get at is, they're on the text level of the story, they're putting all their crap, but the subtext they can't escape, because the movie is concluded with these patriarchal male figures. They do everything possible to avoid killing a single human life, and they endure their own self-sacrifice deaths to preserve the life of one child. That's the Christ story, right?
Yeah.
He would do anything to not use violence, but would do non-violently to lay down his life for a friend or an enemy, right?
Yeah, he'd become the victim of violence in order to do that.
So this stupid little slop thing, they put their gay crap, they put their, this thing, that thing, they put their witchcraft, but they still operate under this message that Christ is king.
Yeah, they can't.
And that's what gives me hope, that they can't run from it. Their dreams are infected by Christ. They can't escape it.
Yeah, they can't get outside of the eschatology of it. They can't get outside of the mythology of it. They can't get outside of the story. They can't get outside of that narrative.
They're stuck in Christ's story. They can't get out. So they're screwed. And the problem is we're screwed too, because a lot of us are going to get hurt because they're flailing around. But it's like they're stuck too, because the box office, they wouldn't get the returns on Doctor Strange that they need from the masses if they reversed it and made the witch, who represents how Tony Fauci and everybody then, how they actually act, where they'll kill everybody just to save their own selfish, friends.
Yeah.
They don't, they know that will get a flop at the box office. They know that the human masses are longing for a Christ story. And so they put their trash into it, but it doesn't stick. What resonates in the spirit is the catharsis, right?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I'll have to check that out, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But yeah.
Well, it's all of their movies though, because I watch these little things. They're all like this. But my point in saying this is that gives us a clue, I think, into how to beat it. In my opinion, is you got to tell stories, and I think we also have to figure out how to be more intentional with our use of political engagement, because I think so much of the power of the left is given because of the right giving it its power.
It's like a dialectic. Yeah. Just like this, shooting in Buffalo, now it's being condemned as this white supremacist act and all this, but this shows you though that they're producing these kinds of people. by virtue of what they're doing on their side, you know, by promoting all this fractiousness with identity and so forth, and by, you know, putting in your faces this idea of, you know, the extolling of the, you know, the minority of the Black as against you, and you're nothing compared, you know, you're evil. It actually produces the very evil that they say exists, and it's a dialectical process. So there is some use to dialectics after all. They use it. I believe they use it on purpose, frankly.
Well, let me see if I get this right. So I've noticed that when there's a killer who is right adjacent enough,
yes,
they blow it up and make it the biggest thing. And they say anything you say. If Tucker Carlson says the one wrong word of that at his promo at his show the week before, the week after, he is scapegoated. You know, you are
totally close. Yes, he's definitely being held accountable by the establishment and all their minions for this shooting. Yeah.
But the way the project seems to work is that when there's a person who kills people, like remember there was the guy who drove into the Capitol and killed one guy. Nobody even remembers it's a black guy doing something. He had some black nationalist thing. There was the other guy that was the black nationalist shooting people. Those stories they come up and they go away.
I forget what state it was where they mowed on Christmas Eve or Christmas. They mowed over a whole bunch of people.
Now let me understand.
Wisconsin,
is this the way? Does it work in this way so that they intentionally downplay those stories so that the right feels more crazy? They're like, wait.
Yeah, I think so. That actually gaslights the hell out of the right and makes them feel more crazy. Because after all, I really do think leftist ideology is dominant by a long shot. I mean, this is really what's running things, and this is what the elite is feeding, and this is what they're using. This is their main vehicle.
So it makes the left radical nutcases feel more emboldened to do violent things because they say, "Look, I'm glorified or I'm downplayed."
It's actually doing it's actually doing good works in effect. Right. Ethically, from their own internal perspective, it's an ethical act.
But the right feels radicalized because they say, wait a second, every time their guys are killing people, hardly anybody talks about it. Any guy that kills people that they can say is right, that's all we're told all day long, that we represent those people. And that makes people feel hopeless, like they have no ability to have any.
And that causes them to act out.
Yeah. So how do we
the unstable ones, that is,
as we try to land the plane, how do we enter into that and try to heal that boiling condition?
I think the word healing is a great word to use. Actually, we need to mend the breach, you know, and so we have to come in as healers, as servants, and as peacemakers.
Yeah,
and that we have to do by. Not by exacerbating these things, not by being this constant opposition as such, being, you know, this polar opposite of that, but rather by surmounting it, you know, and showing that you can surmount it. And then maybe people will follow. We need leadership, but we need a different type of leadership. Yeah.
Right.
Maybe then people will follow. Yeah.
Well, very good, Michael Rectenwald. I really appreciate your time, sir. And again, tell us the title of your book that's coming out.
It's called The Great Reset, A Libertarian Perspective, and should be out in a few months, but look for it. And I'll be talking about it further, and hopefully it really makes sense of all this stuff. I'm trying to make sense of it. It's not easy, as we can see.
It is, there's so many places to go, and I like going as many places as possible. It's fun. MichaelRectenwald.com is your website. MichaelRectenwald.com.
MichaelRectenwald.com. Yeah. It's great talking to you, David.
Thank you, sir. Take care.